Hello there, and I am really excited to have Ashley Barlow with us today. Definitely cannot do her story justice with a simple bio, but I'm going to try and share a few of the things that I've learned about her. So Ashley is a former teacher, and she left the classroom to become a lawyer. And then after graduation, she ended up building a private practice alongside her dad. And today she works almost exclusively with families that have children with disabilities in special education, family law, and estate planning. And she is such an incredible advocate, and I love her story. So Ashley, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You did a good job. You summarized it. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and I adore your podcast. We'll have show notes for this episode, so I'll share the link to your podcast too, because I know people are going to want to follow and learn more. But so before we dive into, because I was hoping to pick your brain today about IEP meetings and helping. So on this podcast, we talk specifically more to like special education directors and helping them navigate all of these things. And so I was hoping to pick your brain on like the IEP process and things that we can do at the administrative level. But I'm curious about your journey before we get into all of those details, just a little bit more about your journey into the field of special education consulting. Like what inspired you to head in this direction? Because like you were a teacher and then you became a lawyer, you could have had the broadest, like you could have chosen a lot of different paths. So how did you end up here?
I chose a lot of paths. And what's interesting is, so when I went to law school, it was really just like, I didn't like the bureaucracy of education. And so I thought, well, I'll go to law school, I'll get smarter. And then like, we'll see where the world takes me. I'm fluent in German, or I was at that time. I haven't used my German in quite some time, but I really kind of thought that my JD would take me back into business and that I would use my German and like more of a business, like corporate law kind of a thing. And I applied for all kinds of internships and all kinds of things. And at the end of the day, I just kept working in my dad's private practice, which was a general practice. I mean, we did, as you said, we did family law work, we did estate planning, we did a lot of civil work. Like for a while, I was the landslide lady, which I really did not want to be. And, you know, we represented condominium associations and basically anything but criminal. And I do have a funny story about the like 4 criminal hearings I showed up at. But anyway, I bought the practice from my dad. Okay, so I'm in law school. I start interning for my dad and I'm like, I actually like it here. I've been working here since high school and I like it. I like that I can interact with people and I can really help people. And in other places where I worked or I shadowed or I talked to people, networked, I didn't feel like I was going to get one-on-one ability to help people. And so I realized that I didn't, in fact, go to law school to get smarter. I went to law school to help people. And I kind of went back to my law school essay, like my application essay, which was about bringing people together, which was kind of odd when you think about why you want to go to law school. But I wanted to be able to help people sort through what ended up to be conflict. I didn't know that word then, or like I couldn't summarize it that quickly. So I started practicing with my dad. Of course, I loved it. My dad, when I broke the news to him that I wanted to work with him, he was like, great, because I was going to retire. And I'm like, I know, will you give me 2 years? Now we're 18 years into this and my dad's still working. So I don't know how much he really wanted to retire, but we worked very solidly together for about 15 years. I ended up buying the practice from him about, 6 years into my practice. And I actually started to narrow our focus, like no more landslides, no more civil stuff, no more. And one of the things that I got rid of, interestingly, was anything administrative. And as you know, education is administrative. But administrative law is so nuanced. It's so specific. I was finding myself in Social Security hearings and complicated things, feeling extremely overwhelmed and outmatched. And so I was like, we're not doing that. But I always continue to help people in special education because I was like, well, I was a teacher. I get it. I understand it. I kind of live it, breathe it. At that point, I had Jack, my son who has Down syndrome, because he was born I don't know, 6, 8 years into my practice. And so I started helping people. And I went to a continuing ed thing on helping families that had kids with disabilities. And I was starting to do a lot of that. When I stopped doing family law work, I was only representing families that had kids with disabilities. And I still do some expert witness work in the divorce world. And so I went to this seminar essentially, and the speaker was like, she started speaking our language, right? Like, well, if you have a child with behaviors, you might want to do an FBA and then get a BIP. And when you write an IEP, you start off with an eval, and then you look at plops, and then from the plops you develop goals and you get SDI. And she started talking the alphabet soup, and I was like, I know all of that. So I started doing some research and realized that I really should reverse on my rule, and I should actually tell people I was doing special education work. And the year that I did that, I did no marketing, just total word of mouth. And it was my second highest grossing practice area. So yeah, it was crazy. So now I exclusively do special education and special needs estate planning. And yeah, I mean, that's really kind of the path. There were lots of twists and turns in the middle of that it kind of involved my son's story. But that's essentially how I became a special education attorney.
I love that story. Thank you so much for giving us a little bit of a sneak peek. I'm sure there's way more stories involved in that, but that was great.
There's layers and layers.
Yeah. And so today I really wanted to dive into IEP meetings. And so in your opinion, why is it so important for to get that we're getting these IEP meetings right, from the perspective of the students, the educators, the families, the school districts? Why are the IEP meetings so important?
Well, I think from the parent perspective, there is such an imbalance of power at IEP tables, and parents are so overwhelmed, which then kind of leads to frustration. And, that comes from all kinds of places. I'm a huge fan of organizational leadership. And in fact, I think if there's one thing that special educators could do, especially people in leadership could do, it would be to read some books on teamwork, because this imbalance of power leads to yucky feelings, but there's a lot of other things that lead to yucky feelings that people could sidestep so easily and actually wade through. But I think the problem is that everybody comes in so overwhelmed, right? Teachers and school staff have to teach. Don't forget about that. And not only do they have to teach, but they have to provide in special education that is specially designed and uniquely tailored to a child's profile. And it has to help the child make meaningful progress. My goodness, if I set out every day and thought, what am I going to do with my son, Jack Barlow, that is uniquely tailored to him and is designed to help him make progress that's meaningful today, I think I would have a panic attack before I had my coffee. So teachers have a really significant obligation, and I don't think we can forget that. And then they have all of this dumb bureaucratic garbly-gook that they have to go through, not even including the paperwork, which is just time-consuming and brain-rotting. And so, don't forget that the bureaucracy is why I left the classroom, right? So I'm really intimately attuned to that bureaucracy. And so teachers are overwhelmed because they're just tired, and there's all kinds of interplay and personalities and that kind of thing. And then you put in the fact that parents have to know the law. They have to know special education practice well enough to participate in meetings. They have to know curriculum. They have to know terminology. What is a scope and sequence, right? I talked to somebody yesterday, just as an example. This is what we do. We go on tangents. I hope that's okay. So I talked to somebody yesterday, and she was like, well, the school asked me for my input on what the reading goal was. And I'm like, hallelujah, you're getting collaboration. It's working. And she was genuinely mad. And once I kind of dug into it, what I realized was she was mad because she felt affronted. She was like, I don't know what their goal should be. And I was like, well, it could be as easy as looking at the scope and sequence, figuring out how quickly they're able to get through the curriculum, looking at how many weeks there are in the school year, doing the math, setting the goal out about 20 weeks into the curriculum, and then using our brains and being like, well, how many phonemes are we going to learn in those 20 weeks? How can we make a goal out of those phone names? Obviously, it was a reading goal, right? But like halfway through it, I realized she didn't even know what I meant when I said scope and sequence. And so there's so many places for parents to catch up. The law, the practice, the negotiation, teamwork strategy, that I think people are just so overwhelmed. And then here's the big reason. What happens is we get so mixed up in sometimes like even adversarial negative conflict. But sometimes it's just like this impasse where we aren't speaking the same language. We're not communicating well. We're miscommunicating, in fact. And worst case scenario, ego gets in the way. And then people are like, well, I don't care. It was their idea. And guess who fails when that happens? The kid. The kid doesn't get the services they need. They don't get the instruction they need. They don't get the accommodations, the modifications, those SAS that they need. And then the child who's at the center of this doesn't get what they need. And I see it time and time again. It's really like human nature gets in the way of effectively delivering services to a child.
Yeah, absolutely. What a great, I know that was the broadest question and could have gone a million ways, but that was a really great response. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. I go like 80 layers into the onion deep. I'm sometimes I get too excited.
I love it. And then, I feel like you've started to touch on these, but what are the most common misconceptions that you see around the IEP meeting process? So I think there's we're not using the same language. And I think we maybe have a different perspective on the roles. Like the example that you gave, the parent you said she was mad when they asked for her input on the goal. And so, what do you think those common misconceptions are in the process?
Yeah, from the parent perspective, it's interesting because, I have this other business. It's getting rebranded. It is currently called Ashley Barlow Company. We are trickling out a rebrand, and it will be called the Collaborative IEP. And so I interact, in addition to practicing law in Kentucky, I interact with parents at the Collaborative IEP with parents all over the country. And I also represent parents as an advocate in many other states besides Kentucky, whether it's consultatively or I show up at meetings. And I think if I could say one thing about parents, it's that the biggest misconception is that they're a part of a team and that they are supposed to meaningfully participate. So every single meeting that you go into, every single time, if there's one thing that every single special ed director or meeting chair does well, it is offer parent rights at the beginning. And most of the time people decline them. But surely at some point, parents are like, what is that? And surely at some point they at least skim over it and they're like, oh, meaningful participation. I've got a right to meaningful participation. But parents feel so affronted when they are offered the opportunity to participate in a meeting. And I totally get it. I oftentimes tell parents, I feel like this with taxes. You can, in business, you can have people prepare your taxes. Wonderful. You can also take it 85 steps further and you can have people help you with tax planning or tax advice. And when someone starts to talk to me about tax planning, I have demand avoidance. I go into fight or flight because I find taxes so confusing. I don't like math calculation. I love formal reasoning. I don't like math calculation. So they go too fast for me on the math side. And also don't understand it, so I don't feel empowered. And it kind of elicits this visceral response from me of I don't like it. I don't want to do it. And I think that that's similar to how parents feel in special education. So a trend that I see with parents, honestly, is parents love to complain, but they don't like to dive in and do it. Another misconception that I have talked about a lot, and I actually just developed a resource for it, is the idea that conflict is bad. So there's all kinds of research and there's all kinds of common sense that tells us that conflict is good. So every good movie has conflict. I like really bad movies like rom-coms and they all have conflict, right? The ex-boyfriend shows up. Think about any holiday movie, like those Hallmark Christmas movies. There's always something, right? You find out that the hot marketing director is, writing a story that's going to impact the small business or something. So conflict is good. I always say conflict yields effective change. If we can effectively work through conflict, we can allow people to be better leaders. We can tease out things. And ultimately, there's all kinds of research that indicates that sometimes people just want to be heard. It's like, hear me out. Like, people actually just want to be heard out. And then things are calm, even if we agree to disagree or we negotiate, right? So I like to talk about good, productive, ideological conflict as opposed to that damaging adversarial conflict. I think that's a huge misconception. The school team, I honestly think, and this is kind of my parent hat coming on, and but me also, working with a lot of families. I honestly think that school teams oftentimes think that their job, and I think this came experientially, right? I think parents have a lot of blame in this, if there's blame. But I think school teams oftentimes think that their entire job is to develop the IEP, to implement the IEP, and to just simply keep parents up to date. And I love to talk about this analogy of work. Okay, so let's say that school is planning a big festival, right? Like put on whatever your big festival is. At my kids' elementary school, it was called Santa House. So Santa House, there's an adult craft fair and there's a kid craft area and there's a place where they can shop for their families and there's bouncy houses and there's games and it looks just like everybody else's school festivals, raffle tickets, pictures with Santa, all the things. Hairspray that never comes out of your hair or your fingernails. And so of course, there's an overall chair and then there's the room chairs or the activity chairs. And then there's the school liaison and there's all these leaders and you have a meeting every single month in order to plan your school event. Well, in special education, we're supposed to develop this IEP and develop annual goals. And we're supposed to meet annually and we're supposed to evaluate triennially. And we're supposed to do all of these, report progress concurrent with report cards, which is probably 3 times a year. Anything that matters is 3 times a year, right? Because nobody looks at them in May. And we never, ever come back and communicate. We never come back and say, how's that going? Yet all over the internet and all over the world and even commonsensically in our minds, data is supposed to drive instruction. But how come nobody ever talks about the data? How come the SLP never talks to the OT about the motor planning of the articulation piece or the PT? How come the teacher in the self-contained classroom that ostensibly is an OT, like me, I always say I'm a lay OT. I can do OT until the stars come down. And I'm also an ENT. I'm real good at ears. If you need any help, I could look in there and help you. And for the record, I'm not an OT. I don't want to get arrested. That's probably criminal to act like an OT. But you know what I mean? So how come that teacher that knows so much about OT doesn't feel comfortable saying to the OT, I just really wonder if he would benefit from sensory calming strategies instead of sensory alerting strategies? So this kind of conflict is good. This kind of give and take is really good, but it doesn't happen. We don't have those discussions throughout the year. And then I'll give you one last misconception that I think is super common. And that is that we forget that we're a team, that we are supposed to work together as a team, right? So that means that frequent communication. It also means that everybody has to think about their environments. So the purpose of IDEA, if you look in if you were in the big book in the law school library, I would say you'd be in the first 3 or 4 pages. There's literally a purpose. All laws have a purpose, and they're supposed to make sense. The purpose of IDEA is really cool. It's to prepare students for further education, employment, and independent living. Well, 2 of those are really, really future forward. And education is also future forward, especially if you're talking about kids with more significant needs. So the idea of kind of lifelong learner, right? So I always say kids are basically in 3 environments: school, home, and community. Well, guess who the general contractors are of 2/3 of those environments: home and community? Parents. So it's really important that schools get information from parents. Now, a lot of times they say, what are your goals? What do you guys think? And parents are like, I wish they would stop picking on their hangnails, or I wish they would become more independent with toileting, or, I picked something deliberately menial and then something super common. But they don't say like, I would like to create meaningful opportunities for them to interact with their peers in an athletic situation because I know that they need to establish healthy lifestyle habits because we're preparing them for further education, employment, and independent living, right? Like, I hope that my kid lives in an apartment complex with a gym. So I would like for them to be able to learn how to work out in a gym. And I think that being, on the basketball team would help, but there's all kinds of ways that are going to prohibit them from being on the basketball team. So how can we help that, right? And we forget that we need input from parents for that. And here's like the big misconception. You can ask. Like, you can ask more deliberate questions. You can ask for more. You can elicit more of a conversation from parents inside and outside of the actual IEP meeting in order to get that good information.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious, have you seen this like play out in like kind of an ideal world scenario? Because like if the misconceptions are like, because I understand too, like your tax example was beautiful. Like I kind of expect my tax person to be the expert. It's like, you should know, like, but ask, like the speech therapist gets to be the expert on speech and language development. The OT gets to be the expert on the sensory stuff. And we get to share our shared expertise. But it's not fair to expect a parent to be an expert in speech and language development and magically get a master's degree and understand all of that context. Like, no, the speech therapist can shape the goals, but the parents, like you said, they're the general contractor of 2/3 of the student's life. So they have so much, like they're the expert on the child. So the speech therapist gets to bring the expertise, and we just need to find the ways to pull in the parents' expertise and, well, everyone's relevant expertise and ask like the right questions is my perspective of what you're
Great.
saying.
Yeah.
But have you seen that? Like, do you ever see it play out that way? Like, are there meetings where it does actually happen like this?
Yeah. Yeah, it happens like that super, super often. I think the real key is very frequent, very good communication. So actually, like the folks in my membership over at the Collaborative IEP have a ton of templates. And one of them is a Sunday email template. And I also have a Friday email template that I provide to school districts when I go speak to school districts. That's like, here's what's happening. Here's what they're learning at school. Here are experiences that they had at school. Like, I personally never know if there's an assembly, right? That's not something that goes in the principal's dumb Friday email that tells you about the Washington, D.C. trip 35 times. And so I don't know that. And because my kids haven't been at the same school in like 4 years, I don't hear it from my older kid. I don't think it's fair to interview the kids as they're leaving school. Like, what did Jack do today? I have a lot of friends that do that, but that's just not a skill that Jack prioritizes. He can tell me what he did during the day, but he doesn't. And so I don't know. And therefore, I can't tie things that we experience in the community to things that he does at school. I see the opposite side of that. And like where it works beautifully is honestly for my family. My IEP teams have functioned extremely, extremely ideally for many, many wonderful years. They didn't start off that way. And I kind of learned the hard way, and I just don't take no for an answer. So I'm like, here's what I need. But what I communicate and what I recommend that parents do is that they communicate about experiences so that you can tie experiences to learning. If you've got students that have never been to a pumpkin patch and you're doing a lesson on a pumpkin patch, it's not going to really land. If you've got a student that has like some kind of terrible reaction to Caillou or Bluey, then you probably don't want to bring up Caillou and Bluey there. But if you're trying to work on zones of regulation and you know that the child has watched Inside Out 1 and Inside Out 2, you can make those connections for them. So it could be as easy as putting spelling words on Hot Wheels cars, right? Like that's super simple. But it also could be constant communication so that you know their experiences. And listen, I was a teacher. I know how much time you spend out of the classroom. So I encourage parents to do this in a really efficient way where we just kind of get into this rhythm. Also, another thing I'll say is that when you have to have sticky conversations. Like, when a child that exhibits problematic behaviors comes home and they have a bruise of unknown origin on their arm, and parents have to say like, hey, do you know anything about this? Those kinds of things are far less uncomfortable if you have frequent communication, because your communication is so collaborative. And so I think that that's super important. But where it works really well is when parents either offer it up, which is an ideal situation, and I know that's the minority of the population, or when school teams empower parents with enough information to get what they need. So I'll give you an example. I have 2 new behavior cases right now, and neither of the parents knows a lick about behavior. And so both of them just keep saying, it's getting worse. It's terrible. Nothing's changing. Everything's awful. They don't understand them. If I fire you in homeschool, do I get a refund? And I have not had the time, because behavior cases go so fast. I need to educate myself before I talk to them. But on docket for Monday for each of them is Behavior 101. Okay, so here's what we do. So I'm gonna give you the example, because I think behavior is a place where teams break down all the time, because it is tricky and it's hard to not take behavior personally for everybody on the team, right? Like, I can't tell you how many times we live in a super small community, so everybody knows Jack, and people are like, Jack doesn't like me. And I'm like, no, you don't understand behavior. So with behavior, what I tell parents is, okay, so what we have to do is we have to look at a few problematic behaviors. So we target specific things, and then we take some data on them. Behavior occurs in patterns, so the data will tell us about the functions. Here's 4 primary functions to behavior. Once we identify the functions, then we need to provide super proactive access to that function. We need to provide them access to positive attention. We might even need to give them access to joint attention, access to negative or physical attention. There's 85 kinds of attention. So we have to target in on what we need to provide to them proactively. We also need to support the behavior. So if we find out that the function is attention and that we do better with sensory alerting activities, then we need to provide a menu of sensory alerting activities proactively. It has to be proactive, preemptive, especially when we see, because we're going to have data, especially when we see that the behavior is likely to occur. Then the behavior is going to occur. Fact, nobody get upset about it. The behavior is going to occur. I walk into every school and say, my kid is going to do this, 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 and this. I think it protects my kid. So he's super interested in this. And not only that, but it also actually physically protects them, right? Like, one of the things is when children are really interested in firearms, I'm like, well, school needs to know that, because that could be really scary if they don't. And then, so the behavior is going to happen. We have to have consistent reactive strategies every single time so that the child knows exactly what to expect, right? That took me 90 seconds to say to you. It might take me 120 seconds to say to the parent. Well, then I can say, what do you see as things that might cause aggression or might cause cursing? Or when does cursing happen at your house? Okay, and what do you do about it? And they just start talking. And then you're like, well, is there anything you do before it that helps? How do they feel about, you start talking about sensory stuff, or I've already used sensory. You start talking about executive functioning. So how do they do with emotional shift? What's their room look like? If you ask them to clean their room, can they do it? Or do you have to say, get all the cups out? Now make your bed. Here's how you make your bed. You have to pull up your sheet. You have to do this. You have to do that. If you ask them questions, I promise, once I get people going, my consult is 1 hour. I can educate people in 10 minutes and get an hour's worth of content so that I really understand the profile of a kid. School teams, I think, just think they've got so much to do. And I'm like, so parents sometimes need a little education on something so that then we can move forward, right? And here's the benefit that you have that I don't. You have all of those scopes and sequences. You have all of the descriptions of the program. Pull out Minds in Motion and be like, this is this program called Minds in Motion. Here's what it does. Has your student ever done this? Do you think they would benefit from visually stimulating circumstances? Or have you ever done something like wall push-ups? You can't just expect them to be able to pull information out of space. They need a little context.
Yeah. No, I love that. And Like it seems like it really boils down to asking the right questions. And we might, because I mean, I know every teacher and administrator and speech language pathologist that I've talked to, like everyone on the school team says, but we don't have time. And they are spread really thin. But I also think we're all in it for the students. And I think we need to like find ways to work smarter. And the way that things are going aren't like if we are having those really challenging IEP meetings, it's not working. And everyone is on edge. We're not doing the best for the students. But if we can find those high value strategies like you're sharing, like providing a little bit of education up front, yeah, we might end up taking like having an extra like 30-minute meeting with a parent to walk through like the quick behavior 101 and get some of their feedback and their expertise from their perspective of their kiddo. But that is going to help us provide, like that'll make the IEP meetings in the future much easier because we're on the same page and we're able to provide more effective interventions. And so it's just like this massive snowball effect of like, this can have a massive impact.
I mean, I'm thinking about a student that I have who is just exhibiting like really, really dangerous behaviors. And his mom and dad meant so well. The mom had always provided in-home childcare as a profession. And so she really understood kids. The dad's a coach. And we started down this like major like fidelity of the behavior program path. And we spent probably 3 IEP meetings that were spaced 6 weeks apart on that. And finally, I was like, let's look to see if maybe there's a skill deficit or if this could be sensory processing. So as a team, everybody decided to look at the skill deficit. Nothing. Now, 1,000 times I had said to the parents, has anybody ever talked about sensory? No. I mean, we've tried different medications. We tried different sleep. We tried to even like see what grandpa could do to help. Like we tried all of these things. And I just was broadly saying like, and what about sensory? Like, do you notice a difference if he's like done his sport and then participated or if this? But I just kept asking broad questions. Finally, I was like, let's take 15 minutes and talk about sensory. I literally this is what I do often, put into ChatGPT. What are some questions I can ask parents to see if their child might struggle with sensory overload or if proprioception might help this student learn? Because he's like deliciously squishy. And like, again, remember, I'm a lay OT. I'm not an OT, but I was like, I just think he's got like squishy muscle tone. So let me just see if some heavy work would help this kid. I started asking questions. The answer to every single one of them was like, well, yeah, sure. So I was like, I mean, honestly, what I did in that case, we had bugged the IEP team so much. I was like, what's your copay to go to private OT? They did a private OT evaluation. This child is like a new kid. He goes to OT once a week. Of course, we got him OT at school. They just had a meeting and the mom called me crying because she was like, it was so collaborative. It was so amazing. We have figured him out. And it was because I used ChatGPT to ask him 10 questions that I had kind of glossed over for about 18 months. So like, I definitely think that getting the information from the parents can really help. And now it's so much more efficient. They've had one meeting in the last 12 months and it was the annual. So it actually does save time and certainly stress because you're able to teach them. My own IEP team I've talked to my child's teacher one time this year and it's because he threw his glasses in the garbage can and they're gone. I haven't talked to him at all. But it's because we have a good communication pattern. And like literally now we can text stuff like that. Like he had a behavior that would have suspended a lot of my students a couple of days ago. I got a text. I implemented my home strategies. I said, go for it on your school strategies. Boom. That behavior is not going to happen again because we're so lined up. So yes, I think those educational calls help. I think soliciting the information from the parents helps. And I think educating the parents helps. You know that there's like a thing where parents are supposed to get education. And by the way, teachers don't have to do it. You can do it from like your district office. You can do it from educational co-ops. You can get, like, I'm sure that you have parent trainings that nobody even accesses. You can get it there. Heck, you can send them a link to a TPT thing and say, I just think this has a really great explanation and it's $2.50. And if you have the license for the kid already, you might even feel comfortable saying, I have a license, it's for your child. And here it is. Here's the PDF, or ask the author if they care if you share it with the parents. So I realize that it's a little bit more work on the outside, but I do think it's more efficient in the end.
Yeah, because the alternative, like of the example that you shared with the dangerous behaviors, if that sensory conversation hadn't happened, the behaviors would have continued. They would have had meeting after meeting after meeting after all of these issues that are happening. The student isn't accessing the curriculum because of all of these interruptions, and it just continues and continues and continues.
Right.
And so it's like, which one do we want?
Well, yeah. And like, I think what it boils down to when you're trying to work through this stuff is, here's another kind of epiphany that I give to parents. So the difference between advocacy, negotiation, and compromise. Advocacy is like those parents that come in and they're like, he is worthy. He needs this. We're getting OG reading implementation. It's going to be done with fidelity. It's going to be in the What Works clearinghouse. OG, right? Now, there are things where we have to advocate. I always say, like, the best example is accessibility. If a building is not physically accessible to a student, maybe they're utilizing a wheelchair, maybe there's no place for them to play on the playground, you have to advocate. There's no room for wiggle room. Advocacy has no wiggle room. A lot of times schools get stuck in advocating. The next step would be to negotiate, where you expect the people are going to wiggle. Like, we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. Maybe we're stealing some math minutes to focus on reading for a second because the parents just absolutely positively don't want any more pull out minutes. So sometimes we have to negotiate. We have to have a little bit of give and take. And I think schools can proactively negotiate. I have literally had special ed directors thousands of times meet me in the hallway and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to give you some additional compensatory education because we realized that we were missing 10 minutes a week on the speech goal. Or, you know what? I think, why don't you talk to your parents really quickly because they asked for something last year and we didn't do it. And now we're thinking that would have been really helpful. Like, come off of your mark in the beginning. Show them that you're willing to make a bold move. Offer stuff like, hey, I wonder if we could meet in the middle. And then there's compromise, where I always tell people, like, school teams and parents alike should decide, what do we want? And then how important are they? Prioritize them and let go of some of the stuff. You have to be able to let go of some of the stuff. Compromise on the stuff that doesn't necessarily matter. Some of the stuff that you have to compromise on really goes to people's values. Like, I'm sorry, I'm an old school teacher. I just can't let a kid have gum in class. Okay, cool. Where they're diabetic. Can they please have access to Skittles? Done. Sometimes we have to compromise, but parents just get so hung up on, like, I have to have this thing at this time in this place from this person, and they just get stuck on it. And I think that's a huge concept for people to understand.
Yeah. And I think if we can start meetings with or just have this be the overall intention of, okay, we're all in this to do what's best for the kiddo. And like, let's figure out how we can make this work in the best interest of the child. So maybe those specific parameters don't have to be as important as long as we're looking at that big picture.
Yeah. I mean, they're going to be in school until they're 18 plus or minus, maybe 22.
Yeah.
And we're lifelong learners, right? So like, today is really important, but what I always say to my 17-year-old is, why don't you think about if on, October 15th, 2085, you're going to remember that you didn't get to Impractical Jokers today.
I love that.
Probably
that can apply to so many of our own problems too. Like, I spilled my coffee this morning. Is it going to matter in 2085?
Yes.
I love that. Give us some perspective.
Right.
Amazing. I feel like I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours and hours, and I have 5 million more questions. But I think let's close out with this question. Just in terms of, okay, so like if we're talking to special education administrators, directors, based on, because you shared so many great insights and strategies, but what are maybe like three, if you could tell a SPED administrator three things, like what would you tell them that might help them navigate these meetings a little bit more efficiently? Just like whether it's a quick recap of what you shared or.
Well, okay. I think the first one is you're a cheerleader. So you are a leader. I realize, because I love teamwork and organizational leadership, that you are managing a lot of interest and values. You are managing tons of personalities, and you're trying to protect everybody on the team from different things. You know, a lot of times decisions that you are making are because you aren't necessarily confident in the outcome, right? Like you might have a teacher that you think is just not a good match for a student. You might have a teacher that you don't think is very confident. And your job involves, it is not solely, and this is where it's hard, but to do an extraordinary job, your job involves cheerleading and also compromising. So sometimes you have to say to the teacher, listen, you know what? I just don't think you're a good fit. And so we're going to cut our losses here, and we are going to allow them to have that other teacher or that other classroom or that other placement or that other school or whatever. Sometimes you have to have the hard discussions, but it's because you're cheerleading for your system. But from a cheerleading perspective, a lot of times you're saying to your teachers, hey, you know what? We can do this. We can do this. So one of my favorite strategies in meetings is actually to look at the administrator that I see, like, I see a light bulb and they start thinking like, I wonder if we could do it this way. Say those things. When you start to think creatively because you're really good at your jobs, say what's on your mind. Like think creatively and cheerlead for the what if. So that's one. The other one is, I think it's very important. So I believe in interest-based negotiation. Interest-based negotiation focuses on the why behind the positions. So you might have a position of, this child has to go to this school. Like it's an LRE case and it's just the child has to go to a more restrictive environment. Or we can't do outplacement because we believe we can meet the child's needs. Wherever you are in this continuum, right? So what you have to communicate is your why. You have to communicate the reasons behind your position. Because if you get locked in, this is what I want, the parents are going to get locked into this is what I want. And so you have to know why the parents what they want, and you have to know why you want what you want, in order to see if you can meet in the middle. If the goal is truly to work as a team, then you have to collaborate, which involves some negotiation and moving off of your point. I always give this example of what if somebody wants to watch Dancing with the Stars and somebody wants to watch football? Well, the reason you want to watch Dancing with the Stars is not because you enjoy dancing. It's because the friends at work talk about dancing the next morning. So now Dancing with the Stars is time sensitive. The reason when you want to watch football is because football good. I like football. Okay, cool. You can do that anytime. So on Monday night, I don't know if they're both still on Monday night, but on Monday night, I'm going to watch Dancing with the Stars so I can talk about it on Tuesday morning. And then on Tuesday, you're going to watch football on TiVo or whatever. I don't know, recorded. Does TiVo still exist? Now it's TiVo, the shopping site. But you're going to watch it recorded and you're just going to stay off Twitter all day so that you don't know what happened. We get to the interest and we're both happy, right? I think the third thing is know the child and try to understand the personalities. I've just gone to so many meetings where administrators are so incredibly wonderful because they know the child, and it doesn't sound self-deprecating. It doesn't sound like you're gaslighting. It doesn't sound like you really know your stuff. You just really know the child, and it's so helpful when people can really celebrate the child. I mean, I love it. I have heard the funniest things in meetings, don't take her peas. That was the funniest one recently. I'm like, what's she like peas? So random. So really celebrate the child, and you can't celebrate the child until you know them.
Yeah. And that really helps break the ice too, because everyone, like, it is a very, like, parents are overwhelmed. They're stressed. There's all this alphabet soup and they're really worried about their child. There's that fear. Like, there's so many emotions. And I think if the team walks in showing, like, yes, we know your child, we can celebrate them, that just helps reduce that. And it is like, it's a great way to communicate very clearly that, like, yes, we're all in this for the child. We all have their best interest at heart. And I feel like that just makes everything go a lot more smoothly.
I mean, right. Like, that's the positive, preemptive, collaborative spirit. But also, if you start talking about, why you can't provide the child OG, or why you have to keep restraint and seclusion in the IEP, and the parents know that you couldn't pick the kid out of a lineup, or that the only time you interact with the kid is when there is a restraint, the parents are going to see right through you and there's not going to be any trust. So, like, the foundation of good teamwork, one of my favorite books is called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. The author is Patrick Lencioni. And the first dysfunction is a lack of humility, because if you can't be humble, then people don't trust you. So, like, trust is one of the foundations of teamwork, and they won't trust you if they think that you don't really, really, truly appreciate the child. Plus, going to see kids is fun. Like, that's what you wish you could do all day long.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's definitely, like, it's not an easy job. There's a lot of competing, like we're being pulled in a lot of directions. Our time is spread super thin, and there's a lot of students and a lot of challenges and all of the things. I think that there is definitely value in, because a lot of these things don't necessarily have to take more time. They're like they can be really impactful strategies that help everything run more smoothly and save us time and litigation and all of that down the road too.
Yeah. And work smarter, not harder. With technology, like, there's so many different things. I realize, like, you spend so much time just on drop-down menus and budgets and dumb meetings and that kind of thing. But there are so many ways that you can save time with technology, right? So, like, suggest a shorter meeting and that people use ChatGPT before the meeting. Like, you can streamline things so much faster now in order to get more done. But make sure that you are also taking care of yourselves, because we can't teach kids to take care of themselves if we aren't taking care of ourselves. Kids see right through us.
Yeah, it's not an easy juggling act, this one.
No.
But that is a very important reminder.
But if you could give, that kind of goes back to those interests. Like, I have literally said to teachers or to administrators before, hey, can I go to that whiteboard where you have the master schedule and those little tiles? You know what I'm talking about? Like, where they put the master schedule, and they're like, okay. And I'm like, we're going to go take a field trip, because you know why? My client needs to understand that their child's schedule is part of this ginormous executive function of scheduling. So we have the 3rd grade schedule. We have the special schedule. We have this teacher's schedule. We have the fact that we have to do this curriculum for this many minutes, and we have to meet the 3rd grade reading guarantee, and we have to do this and we have to do that. And oh my gosh, look at that board. And administrators are like, thank you. And what I say to them is, this is the kind of stuff you should be explaining to them. Not because, like, hey, listen to what I have to do, but because we are part of a team and we have to balance the obligations of everybody on the team.
Absolutely. Aw. Well, this was amazing. Thank you so much for your time. And then before we officially wrap, if I recommended your podcast already. I'll put that in the show notes. But do you have any other, like, resources or things you want to shout out before we officially wrap?
Yeah, sure. So like I said, we rebranded Ashley Barlow Company to the Collaborative IEP. The rebrand should be done within the next month to 6 weeks, depending on when this airs. And so I speak to schools. I speak to parent groups. So if you have like a organization that supports your families that have kids with disabilities, I'm happy to come there. I have a training that I think is extraordinary, and some districts have used it to train like paraprofessionals and folks like that. I call it IEPs 101. The name of it is the Special Education and Advocacy Lab, but it's about a 6.5-hour training. It's a digital course, and it goes through the IEP document start to finish, with lots and lots of collaboration and communication tips along the way. And I am certain to teach to both the parent perspective and the school team perspective with examples and that sort of thing, so that the whole message is that we can all collaborate together, but we need this baseline of information.
Yeah. And that sounds like it would be a fabulous resource for anyone on the school team.
Yeah. I mean, especially if you're either new to the special education process, like a related service professional that hasn't worked in schools ever or for a long time. A lot of, I've had teachers buy it for their paraprofessionals, and they use it as part of their training for their IAs and other paras. I've had administrators sit through it too, so that kind of everybody's speaking the same language on the IEP process and the legal side of things and communication collaboration. So yeah, and then the podcast will be rebranded. Right now it's called Special Education Advocacy with Ashley Barlow, and it's going to be called the Collaborative IEP Process. We just really felt like the rebrand kind of spoke to the values of my audience and really shifted the focus to our mission, which is to provide collaborative resources that are more affordable to parents and other IEP team members by way of actual products, actual legal knowledge, negotiation skill, that kind of stuff.
Amazing.
Yay.
Well, thank you so much. This was such a treat. And yeah, thank you to everyone who listened to the episode too. And like I said, check out the show notes in the description of the podcast episode for all the links and just like quick synopsis of everything. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.